So Danny, let me ask you on that note, how do we actually introduce, as you spoke before so eloquently about the oneness of God and the all-encompassing unity within the world, how do we introduce that idea of echad, of oneness, to a child, an educable child, 6, 7, 4 years old, without offering them a false echadness in their innocent little minds, and having them have to deprogram themselves once they mature?
I think when we're talking about a child and how a child envisions God, this is immediately relevant for any grown person too. I would put it this way. I think every person starts off as a mystic. What I mean by that is an infant does not yet have the sense of a separate self. Most child psychologists say it's sometime in the second year that an infant really distinguishes between self and mother, between me and other. Until then, there really isn't a boundary, a sharp boundary between self and the world. So in a sense, you might say that every infant has this cosmic consciousness. Now, of course, we can't survive very long in the world if we don't know where we end and that truck coming down the road begins. We have to have a sense of self. We have to develop an ego. Otherwise, we don't survive more than a very short time. So it's a strategy for maintaining our existence in the world to develop a healthy sense of ego. But we pay a price for that ego. If we have a solid boundary to the ego, we can't interact with the wider world. So you might say the spiritual path is to regain a sense of oneness, but without reverting to infantile mentality. Somehow to maintain our existence in the world, to maintain our identity of a self, and yet for that to be a semi-permeable barrier, to let in the outer world, to interact with the world, and ultimately to realize our oneness with the whole universe once again. So that's something that all of us learn as we progress, and yet most people end up with a stunted theological image. Most of us are frozen in that state of God as Father in heaven. So I think it is appropriate to have a child question the nature of God, the image of God, the reality of God, but the teacher can learn as much from the student as the student can from the teacher here, because the child is somewhat closer to that initial sense of wonder and oneness. So it's a two-way street.